Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to HOA and Karn Stories and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? The day I inherited my family's land was supposed to be quiet. A formality, a signature, maybe a slow drive past old trees and memories. Instead, it started with a man in a neatly pressed HOA polo shirt standing in front of a security gate, calmly telling me I was trespassing on property my family had owned longer than he had been alive. Behind him stretched hundreds of identical houses, manicured lawns, shiny roofs catching the morning light. An entire neighborhood built on land that, according to the letter in my glove compartment, legally belonged to me. That was the moment I realized this wasn't a mistake. It was something far bigger, far deeper, and already moving against me. I stood there with my truck idling, dust settling around the tires, key still warm in my hand, trying to understand how a piece of paper from a lawyer's office had turned into a uniformed stranger telling me I didn't belong. The guard wasn't rude. He was professional, almost bored, like he'd rehearsed the words. "Sir, if you don't live in the community, I'm going to need you to turn around." I looked past him, past the gate, into the neighborhood. Street signs, playground equipment, porch lights still glowing from early mornings. Families waking up, kids getting ready for school, all of them unaware that the ground beneath their feet had a history they'd never been told. I gave him my name. It meant nothing to him. I told him I was there to see land I had just inherited. That's when his expression changed, not to anger or fear, but to something like pity. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "That land was developed years ago." In that moment, something clicked. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a system, and I had just stepped into the middle of it. I did grow up thinking about inheritance. In my family, land wasn't discussed like money. It wasn't an asset you flipped or leveraged. It was just there. Solid. Permanent. My grandfather bought it after the war, back when nobody wanted rocky hills and thick trees. He worked it slowly with his hands, cleared what he needed, left the rest wild on purpose. He raised children there. He buried his wife there. He used to say land didn't ask for much, just respect and patience. When my parents died, I was still a kid. Too young to sign anything. Too young to understand probate courts or what happened when paperwork got misplaced and time kept moving. The land didn't disappear. It drifted. Held by the state, managed, protected, at least that's what they said, until I was old enough to claim it. Life moved on without it. I moved away, built a career, paid rent, lived like someone who assumes the past is settled and the future will behave. The land became a story I told sometimes, usually casually. Past tense, safe tense. Then the letter arrived. Plain envelope. No drama. Inside was a notice from a law office I didn't recognize. A long, dormant estate had finally cleared its final hurdle. According to the documents, I was now the legal heir to roughly 100 acres of land. I read the number twice, then again. It didn't feel real. I called the attorney listed. He confirmed everything, explained the delays, then hesitated just slightly before saying, "There may be occupants." He didn't explain further, and I didn't press. I assumed maybe a hunting lease or an old structure. Nothing serious. I didn't rush back. I didn't pack boxes or make plans. I told myself I'd take a drive one weekend, walk part of the property, reconnect with something that had quietly waited for me for decades. That's how lightly I took it. No one warns you what it feels like to learn your inheritance didn't sit still. It got used. It got built on. It got sold to people who never knew your name. 2 days after the gate incident, the email arrived. Polite subject line. Neutral language. The Homeowners Association invited me to a clarifying conversation. The meeting took place at a house I recognized instantly, sitting at the highest point of the subdivision, overlooking everything. Bigger, newer. designed to remind everyone who was in charge. That was where I met Karen, the HOA president. She greeted me with a perfect smile and a firm handshake, sunglasses pushed up just enough to make eye contact feel intentional. We sat at a long kitchen table flooded with sunlight. From my chair, I could see rooftops stretching in every direction, all built on land my grandfather once walked without fences. She didn't waste time. She laid out maps, development plans, thick binders filled with tabs and highlights. Everything neat. Everything official. According to her paperwork, the land had been legally transferred decades ago. Permits approved. Titles issued. Millions invested. Families living there now. Schools, utilities, roads. She spoke calmly, confidently, like she was explaining something obvious. Then she looked at me and said it, almost kindly. Your inheritance is symbolic, not cruel. Not harsh, just dismissive. She explained that while my family may have once owned the land, progress had moved on. What I had, she said, was a story, not a claim. I asked her one question. If that was true, why was she talking to me? Her smile tightened. That's when she made the offer. They could buy me out, a generous sum, she said. Or I could join the association as a non-resident member, limited rights, but enough to move forward peacefully. She spoke like she was doing me a favor. I looked around her kitchen, at the view, the elevation, the power built into the walls. She wasn't afraid of me. She was confident. Confident the courts wouldn't tear up a neighborhood for someone who showed up late. Confident the system rewarded momentum more than truth. I told her no. The air changed. Her tone cooled. She reminded me that resisting reality could be costly. Legal fees, delays, complications. She spoke like someone who had seen this play out before and knew exactly how it ended. As I walked out, I took one last look through the windows. From up there, the land looked settled, finished, claimed. But my grandfather used to say, land remembers who cared for it first. As I drove away, I understood something else. This wasn't going to be fixed with a conversation. This was a power play, and Karen, sitting at the top of my land, had no intention of giving any of it back without a fight. The letters started arriving the following week, quiet and polite at first, the kind of mail that looks harmless until you realize how heavy it feels in your hands. Thick, white envelopes, official logos. Language that smiled while it tightened a grip around your throat. The first one thanked me for my anticipated cooperation, a phrase that should have warned me immediately. It explained that a review of adjacent properties was underway and that my inclusion status would soon be clarified. Clarified by whom? It didn't say. It didn't need to. 3 days later, another letter arrived. This one had numbers. According to the Homeowners Association's records, I owed nearly 15 years of back dues. Landscaping fees, road maintenance, security patrols, community amenities I had never used, never agreed to, and had never been allowed past the gate to see. There was a tidy breakdown and a total at the bottom, followed by a gentle reminder that interest continued to accrue. I read it twice, then laughed, a short, dry sound with no humor in it. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't joined anything. I hadn't even been allowed onto the property. The third letter dropped any pretense. It cited violations, non-compliant fencing, unauthorized structures, failure to submit exterior plans for approval. It was almost impressive how many rules I had broken without ever being a member. At the bottom, in smaller print, was the sentence that changed everything. Failure to comply may result in enforcement procedures, not discussion, not mediation, enforcement. That was when I understood what this really was. Not a disagreement. Not a misunderstanding. It was paper warfare. The kind that doesn't smash windows or raise voices. It buries you slowly under notices and deadlines until you're too tired or too broke to keep standing. I called the number listed on the letter. After being transferred twice, a woman finally answered and introduced herself as a compliance coordinator. Her voice was calm, practiced, completely uninterested in my explanation. "Our records show inclusion," she said. "Inclusion in what?" I asked. "The community," she replied, as if there were only one in the world. I asked her to show me a document with my signature on it. She paused, then said, "That will be addressed during the enforcement process." That was the moment I stopped trying to explain myself. Instead, I started collecting. Every letter went into a folder, then a binder, then another. I scanned everything. I saved envelopes. I logged dates and times. The language in the notices grew colder, more legal, less human. One letter thanked me for my continued non-response. Another warned that silence could be interpreted as consent. That one made me sit down. They weren't trying to convince me. They were creating a record, a trail that would look reasonable to anyone skimming it months later. They weren't aiming to win an argument. They were trying to outlast me. I drove out to the edge of the land one afternoon and stood there, looking at trees my grandfather had marked decades earlier, old fence lines. Stones set by hand. None of it mattered to the binders piling up on my desk. The system didn't care about memory. It cared about documentation, and they had plenty of it. A week later, I went back with a printed survey in the passenger seat, planning to walk the boundary quietly. That's when I saw the stakes. Bright orange, fresh, driven into the ground where they had never been before. I followed them and found a group of men in safety vests, GPS units clipped to their belts, measuring my land like it already belonged to them. When I asked who authorized the survey, one glanced at his clipboard and said, "The association." I told them they were on private property. They didn't argue. One of them simply made a phone call. 10 minutes later, 2 police cruisers rolled up. The officers listened politely as I explained. They looked at my documents. They nodded. Then one of them said the words everyone dreads hearing. "This is a civil matter." As they turned back to their cars, I noticed Karen standing near her SUV, sunglasses on, arms crossed, watching like this was all exactly how she expected it to go. One of the officers waved to her by name. She smiled back. That casual familiarity told me everything. The surveyors went back to work. I stood there holding paperwork that suddenly felt very small. That night, I laid my grandfather's hand-drawn maps next to the HOA's glossy diagrams and saw the problem immediately. Their boundaries crept just a little. A few feet here, a curve straightened there. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious unless you knew what to look for. Enough to claim ground by repetition. I stopped reacting and started preparing. I called a land attorney who specialized in boundary disputes, someone used to untangling claims older than most buildings. Then I called a forensic surveyor, not a firm that worked subdivisions, but someone who worked with original plats and historical markers. Someone who understood that land doesn't lie, people do. It didn't take long for the pressure to change shape. The nails came first. Roofing nails scattered along the dirt access road, spaced just far enough apart to damage tires without looking deliberate. Then trash appeared near the fence line. Broken pallets. Drywall scraps. When I cleared it, more showed up closer to the gate. My "No Trespassing" sign vanished overnight, then reappeared bent and tossed into the brush. Each incident lived in the gray space between coincidence and intent. The kind designed to exhaust you. Then it got personal. My wife noticed a dark sedan idling near the end of our drive when she left for work. It showed up again. And again, never close enough to confront. My son came home from school quieter than usual and asked why someone said we might have to move. A teacher had heard it from a parent. They said you were in trouble. That was the moment everything hardened. I installed cameras the next day. Quietly, motion activated. Cloud backed. I didn't post signs. I didn't announce it. I just watched. Late one night, the alerts came in. Two men in HOA jackets walking the fence line with flashlights pointing, whispering, inspecting like planners, not passersby. I called the sheriff's office. The response was sympathetic and hollow. Hard to prove intent. Civil matter. For the first time since this began, I wasn't angry. I was clear. This wasn't about dues or rules or paperwork anymore. This was intimidation. And once your family becomes part of the pressure, the rules change. I walked the land again, slower, photographing old markers and trees my grandfather had blazed by hand. I wasn't wandering anymore. I was documenting. That night, I told my family the truth. Enough of it. My wife squeezed my hand and said, "Do what you have to do." The next morning, I authorized my attorney to prepare for litigation, not negotiation. I expanded the forensic survey, and I hired a private investigator, someone used to following patterns quietly. When I checked the camera feeds that night, I said the words out loud. This stops now. Because when an organization starts scattering nails on your road, whispering to your kids, and walking your land after dark, you're no longer dealing with bureaucracy. You're dealing with people who believe they can take whatever they want without consequences. And I was done letting them believe that. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It never does. It came slowly, in fragments, pulled from places most people never think to look, buried under decades of quiet assumptions and confident paperwork. The forensic surveyor was the first to call. His voice wasn't excited. It was careful, measured, the tone of someone who knows that when something doesn't add up, you don't rush to say it out loud. He told me he needed a few more days, but there was something there, something that didn't sit right. At the same time, my attorney started pulling county records, original plats, early development filings. Anything that existed before the subdivision had a name and matching mailboxes. What came back wasn't chaos. It was thin, too thin, like someone had removed just enough to let the story pass inspection without drawing attention. When the surveyor finally came out to the property, he brought more than equipment. He brought copies, old ones, yellowed pages stamped by offices that no longer existed. He walked the land slowly, stopping at trees I recognized, stones my grandfather had placed by hand decades earlier. He measured, compared, frowned. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. This land was never sold. I asked him to repeat it. He did. According to the original records, what the development company had secured wasn't ownership. It was a temporary development lease. Limited, conditional, with an expiration date, one that had come and gone years ago. To renew it, they would have needed the consent of the legal heir, me. They never asked. They never could. My attorney leaned back in his chair when he saw the documents and let out a long breath. "That means they don't own it," he said slowly. They never did. The word he used next landed heavy, squatting. Not confusion, not oversight. Squatting. Suddenly, everything made sense. The letters, the pressure, the creeping boundaries. If they acknowledged the lease had expired, the entire structure collapsed. Every home, every permit, every loan tied to land they no longer had any right to. So they did what systems do when truth becomes inconvenient. They buried it. We kept digging. The private investigator brought timelines, corporate shells that dissolved and reformed just in time to move liability, development entities that existed only long enough to pass paper from one hand to another, and always just close enough to touch without being obvious was the same name. Karen. Years earlier, before she was HOA president, before she lived in the house on the hill, she had been a junior attorney working with the development firm. Her name appeared on internal memos, early filings, correspondence that danced carefully around lease expiration dates. One email, dated years after the lease had lapsed, made my attorney go silent. "If we proceed as planned, ownership challenges will be rendered moot by scale." Scale. Enough houses. Enough families. Enough momentum that no court would dare unwind it. They hadn't been sloppy. They'd been patient. I thought back to her confidence, the way she spoke about progress like it was an excuse. She hadn't just inherited power in that community. She had built it on land she knew wasn't hers. The next question was the one that bothered me most. How did this get past the banks? Hundreds of homes don't get built on shaky ground unless someone signs off on it. Mortgages don't exist on faith. They exist on verification. Title searches. Insurance. Layers meant to protect everyone involved. That's where the missing lock was. Every mortgage in that subdivision was backed by a title insurance policy. Someone had certified the land was clean. It wasn't. When the investigator dug into archived underwriting files, what he found wasn't carelessness. It was precision. A legal opinion had been issued years earlier, declaring the land free of encumbrance, overriding concerns raised by junior underwriters who had noticed inconsistencies. The author of that opinion was Karen. Back then, she wasn't running an HOA. She was a contracted attorney. Her name sat neatly at the bottom of a document titled Title Clearance Memorandum. It was dense, confident, filled with citations. It reframed absence as authority. Where signatures were missing, she referenced continuity. Where leases had expired, she cited practical reliance, legal fog, thick enough to make doubt disappear. And it worked. The title insurance company issued coverage. Banks followed. Loans were approved. Foundations were poured. Families signed 30-year notes believing the system had protected them. In reality, the land had been laundered through paperwork. "This isn't negligence," my attorney said quietly. "This is enterprise fraud." When the banks finally came to the table, they brought concern and pressure in equal measure. They wanted reassurance, stability, a solution that didn't involve acknowledging how exposed they were. I listened. Then I showed them the lease expiration, the opinion memo, the email tying the attorney who cleared the title to the same woman now enforcing HOA rules on land she didn't own. The room went quiet. One banker asked what I intended to do. I told him the truth. I'm establishing ownership. What happens to your loans after that is your problem. He didn't like the answer, but he understood it. That was when we filed. Not accusations, facts. A petition to establish title and quiet all competing claims. Clean, precise, demanding a response. The response came fast. The HOA arrived with lawyers, binders stacked like armor. Karen sat behind them, composed, chin high, dressed like someone who expected momentum to save her. The judge was older, calm. The kind of man who'd seen enough bad arguments to recognize a good one early. My attorney didn't start with emotion. He started with dates. The lease, the expiration, the missing renewal, the absence of my signature. Then he placed the title opinion on the table. The judge read it slowly, compared dates, removed his glasses, looked directly at the HOA's lead counsel. "Are you aware that your client's entire subdivision is technically trespassing?" The word hung there. Trespassing. The attorney tried to pivot. Reliance, harm, economic impact. The judge stopped him. "Answer the question." "No, Your Honor," he said. "That's a problem." The ruling didn't end the case. It cracked it open. All HOA enforcement actions were stayed. Authority frozen, and the matter was referred to regulators and criminal authorities. Outside the courtroom, lawyers scrambled. Phones rang. Karen stood alone, no confidence left, just calculation. When she looked at me, she knew. The ground beneath her had shifted. That night, I walked the land again. Same trees, same stones. Nothing looked different. Everything was. Because once a judge says trespassing out loud, the lie can't hide anymore. And what comes next isn't noise. its gravity. The ruling changed everything and nothing at the same time. On paper, the Homeowners Association's authority was frozen. The letters stopped. The patrol cars disappeared. The gate stayed open. But when a system built on intimidation suddenly loses its voice, what follows isn't peace. It's confusion. And confusion has a sound all its own. I drove through the neighborhood a few evenings later slowly, windows down, letting the air move through the truck. Kids rode bikes in the street, weaving between parked cars. Porch lights flicked on one by one as the sun dipped behind the hills. A man waved at me without knowing who I was. A woman walked her dog past a sign still bearing the HOA logo, now stripped of meaning, like a badge from a job that no longer existed. These weren't villains. These were families. People who had trusted paperwork, banks, inspectors, and authority to do the job they were told had already been done. When the court filings became public, word spread fast. Some homeowners came to my gate carrying folders stuffed with mortgage statements and purchase agreements. They weren't angry. They were scared. One couple sat at my kitchen table and explained how they'd emptied their savings for a down payment. Another man told me he'd moved his aging parents into the neighborhood because he believed it would be quiet and safe. A woman apologized before she even finished introducing herself, saying she'd never supported the board but never felt brave enough to speak up. "We didn't know," she said. And I believed her. Not everyone came with humility. A few arrived defensive, demanding reassurance, asking what I planned to do with their homes. One man accused me of trying to profit off other people's misfortune. I listened, then asked him one question. Had he ever supported the enforcement letters they sent me? The fines, the threats, the pressure. He didn't answer. That silence told me everything I needed to know. At night, after the house went quiet, I walked the perimeter of the land again. I looked out at the lights dotting the hills, each one representing a family trying to understand how the ground beneath them had suddenly shifted. I thought about my grandfather's words. Land asks for respect and patience, nothing more. The court had given me leverage. What I did with it would define the rest of this story. The easy path was eviction. The law allowed it. The anger justified it. But justice isn't about choosing the loudest option. It's about choosing the right one. I talked with my attorney, planners, economists, people who understood long-term land use better than short-term revenge. And slowly, a different answer took shape. I didn't dismantle the community. I dismantled the lie holding it together. Every homeowner received the same notice. Clear. Simple. No threats. No legal fog. The land was mine. The HOA no longer had jurisdiction. No one was being forced out without cause. But from that moment forward, occupancy would be governed by lawful agreements, or not at all. I offered long-term ground leases. 25 to 40 years. Fixed terms. Transparent conditions. No behavioral rules. No committees measuring grass height or door colors. No fines slipped into mailboxes. If you paid your lease and respected your neighbors, you stayed. That was it. Some people cried with relief. Others didn't trust it. After years under arbitrary authority, freedom felt suspicious. And then there were a few whose applications were denied. Former board members, the ones who had signed enforcement letters, the ones whose names appeared again and again in complaint logs and camera footage. I didn't argue with them. I didn't justify myself. I pointed to the record and explained that trust, once broken, isn't automatically restored. The banks came next. They wanted meetings, assurances, language that let them pretend the last decade hadn't happened. They spoke about stability and market confidence. I listened, then told them the truth. You didn't verify ownership. You relied on a forged title because it was insured. That's not my emergency. They didn't like it, but they understood. Something unexpected happened after that. Appraisals stabilized. then improved. With lawful leases in place, uncertainty vanished. No hidden authority. No surprise fines. No intimidation disguised as community standards. Security returned, not enforced by patrols, but by clarity. One homeowner told me it was the first time she felt like she actually owned her life there, even if she didn't own the soil. That stayed with me. The final court ruling came quietly. No drama, no speeches, just paperwork. The HOA was dissolved. Its authority voided retroactively. Assets were seized. Accounts frozen. The house on the hill was the first to go. Then the consulting firm. Then the money that had been siphoned off through shell companies and friendly contracts. Restitution was ordered. Funds recovered were set aside for homeowners misled into believing a lie. It didn't make anyone whole. Nothing ever does. But it acknowledged the truth. Karen lost everything the same way she'd tried to take mine. Quietly, on paper. With the HOA gone, the signs came down, the logos, the warnings, the illusion of authority. In their place, one sign went up near the entrance. Simple. Private land. No HOA. People took pictures of it. Some smiled. Some shook their heads. Life moved forward. I still walk the land. I still stop at the stones my grandfather placed and the trees he marked by hand. The neighborhood feels different now. Less managed. Less afraid. More human. I don't pretend everyone sees me as a hero. Some never will. Some lost things they cared about. That matters. But justice doesn't mean nobody gets hurt. It means the right people stopped getting away with it. When the dust finally settled, I stood where the house on the hill once overlooked a system built on intimidation and borrowed certainty. The ground felt the same beneath my boots. Solid, patient, honest. Land doesn't ask much. Just respect. And when you refuse to let it be used as leverage by people who confuse control with ownership, it has a way of setting things right. Slowly, firmly, without asking permission. If this story made you think, shocked you, or reminded you just how far power can go when no one pushes back, make sure to like this video, subscribe to HOA and Karen Stories, and tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today?